morning, everyone. You are at Coffee with Miss Cook plus friends. And as always, a couple of housekeeping items up top. Please stay on mute, actually, for the duration of this coffee. When we get to questions, I'll have you put them in the chat just so we're not, having chaos. And our agenda this morning is, as always, I've got a little content for you all up top just to tell you what's coming with the balance of the school year. We then have three wonderful college representative guests with us this morning to help talk with you a little bit about your search and some advice. And then as we have time, we'll do a little more Q&A in the chat. I've got some questions I'm going to launch to all of them that will probably cover a lot of the general topics that are on your mind. And then we'll see if there's anything we missed. As always, we're recording. When Mr. McDonald gets this on the JCHS YouTube panel, I will send it out to all of you. And then this is an hour-long program, so we have a hard stop at 9. As always, if there are still questions in the chat, terrific. You can ask them of me later on, and we'll continue the conversation. So just to orient you to where we are with the college advising timeline at JCHS, I'm sure there's some buzz in your house as the kids are preparing for journeys next week. Good for everyone to have a week to be out of school for a moment and do some fun things. When they return from Portland, it will be an action-packed couple of weeks towards the end of the school year in terms of college advising. So we will start with some spring college advising appointments, their second one-on-one meeting with me after journeys. So that first Monday they're back, April 8th, I will send out signups for that. And then I will start those meetings the week of April 15th. And once again, everyone needs to come in and meet with me before the end of the year. So I'll do them throughout March as well, or May, when we're back from PASOC break. And it's a formal check-in, but we'll also be talking about their recommendation letters, checking in on testing, making sure if they haven't put some things in SCORE, we've got some things in SCORE. So more information on that, again, I'll email all of you as I always do with content. We also have the case studies program happening on April 14th at the University of San Francisco. As a reminder, that's a mock admission committee exercise and then a college fair. And there are about 100 college reps, maybe more, signed up to attend that. I pushed out the signups on Monday. There was a faulty link in there, so I sent you a new StriveScan link yesterday. Just know that any human that's going, so parent or student, needs to have their own barcode. So just make sure you register that way. And there'll be reminders and things coming up. But again, April 14th, that's a Sunday, that afternoon, very impactful and helpful event. After PASOC break, immediately we will launch the college essay unit in their English classes. At levels will start immediately. The AP class will start after they've taken their AP exam. They'll have a second questionnaire to do for me, shorter than what they did in the winter, but I want to, find out what the summer plans are, get a little bit more information before we are out for the year. And then we'll have a final coffee with Ms. Cook on Friday, May 10th. And Julie Beck will be joining us for that, so we can talk about some of the social emotional parts of this process, which are very present for seniors right now as we work through decisions, big feelings, and plans for what's next. So Ms. Beck will help talk you through some best practices as a parent to help support your child through the process. So again, all of this will be coming with reminders and email. Keep your eye on the week ahead for reminders, and yeah, exciting times as we get closer to summer. So with that, we will now transition to our rep panel here. And I say reps, but these are actually like very important people at their schools. And so we are lucky to have an hour of their time this morning. And I will just say, I think I still see that we've just got junior parents in the room, but if a senior parent snuck in under a pseudonym, please go away. There are other places where you can ask your questions about what's happened with admission decisions, whereas this is just going to be a conversation about researching and launching the process. And so we've got some guests this morning from colleges that are popular with JCHS families. They represent a range of types of institutions that students can select from. And so that's very purposeful here. I want you to hear a little bit about the perspective from, a large public research institution, from a medium to large size private institution, and then a smaller liberal arts college, which also happens to be a women's college, because I know there's been some questions and excitement around women's colleges, which we love. And of course, most importantly, these are some top-notch, seasoned professionals in the field they've got long and storied careers. So rather than me just giving their names and titles, I would love, and we'll go alphabetically, if the three of you could introduce yourselves and say a little bit about obviously where you work, but if you've got perspectives from other places as well, that's always great to know. So we'll start with Mr. Gary Clark.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gary Clark. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management at UCLA. I've been at UCLA for, I guess, going on about 12 years. For 11 of those years, I served as the Director of Undergraduate Admission before stepping into this role, which works closely with all of our staff in undergraduate admission and financial aid and scholarships and a couple of other offices. But prior to that, I started my career many years ago at the College of William and Mary. Grew up in Virginia, worked for a number of years as Laura's next door neighbor at Pitzer College out in Claremont. Had a great 6 years there, and then worked in the admission office at USC for about 7 years before moving over to UCLA. So I've certainly seen admission from a handful of different perspectives, and happy to be here with you all this morning.
Thanks. And we'll move on to Mr. Peter Hagan.
Hi, everyone. It's 11:09 where I am, and I'm starting to think about lunch. So I've passed my caffeination point for today. But I'm Peter Hagan. I'm Executive Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Syracuse University, which is a private residential research university with about 15,000 undergraduate students in the center of New York State. And I've been here literally my entire life, but I've been on the admissions staff for 20 years.
Love it. And saving the best for last, Miss Laura Stratton.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Stratton. I'm the Director of Admission at Scripps College. Peter, you look so, for 20 years old, and you're slaying it. So good work for being there your whole life. So happy to be here with you this morning. Scripps is a small residential liberal arts women's college down in Claremont. Member of the Claremont colleges, which include Pomona, Pitzer, Harvey Mudd, Claremont McKenna, and Scripps. And prior to working at Scripps, it's my 17th year there. I was at the University of Redlands for 2 years, which is my alma mater. And before that, a few years at a small Lutheran college. So really happy to be here and excited for the conversation.
Excellent. So we'll get started with a couple of questions here. And for those who joined us late, I'm going to launch some general questions to the three of them, and we'll see how much time as we work through some of these, and then we'll open up for Q&A if we have time at the end, and that will be in the chat. So I appreciate everyone being on mute. Great job. So we've got juniors that are just beginning to really research colleges, visit campuses, all of that. So do you have any advice as juniors and families are starting all of this and trying to formulate a list, opinions, all of that? So anyone who wants to jump in?
I'll get us started and then bounce it over to my colleagues. I think some of it in terms of your role as parents is just spending a little bit of time thinking about mindset. So if you can, to guide your student in conversation with Ms. Cook about having an open mind. I think one of the best things that can happen for a student is for them in this process to be surprised. And that often happens when they visit a campus or they go to a virtual event and they're like, I hadn't thought that would be the thing, but I'm more excited about it than I would be. And then after you're in those visits to just to gut check with your student, right? I think as a parent, I often with my own children, I'm like, want to get to the end so fast. But this really is called a process for a reason. And in that, I think as you're visiting with them, just asking thoughtful questions about how did they feel on campus, what were their takeaways? And then that's an opportunity for you to start to get that information either down on paper on the notes app on your phone, right, as you're leaving a campus. But I do think that that's a great way that you can be sort of the support person for your student as they're starting to visit colleges. And again, just encouraging them to have an open mind.
Yeah, I agreed. And I would add to that. I think one of the very thin silver linings that came out of the pandemic is that colleges really had to kind of up their virtual game during that period because we weren't really doing anything in person. So the ability to really get to know a college or university through what they offer through online platforms that are either live and interactive or recorded content, whether it's tours or classes or admission presentations, is a lot better now than it was, 5+ years ago. So when you're thinking of that place and you're not quite sure if you want to jump on a plane and go too far for a visit yet, take advantage of some of the virtual offerings that they have. I think it allows you to really think more broadly, as Laura suggested, explore some of those places that maybe aren't on the tip of your tongue, and they may be real gems that you want to take some more time to get to know a little bit better. I don't think that replaces the in-person visit. I still encourage as often as you can to visit a college campus. And when you do that, I think one of the things you should always do is definitely do kind of the scheduled tour and the admission presentation, do the formal things as part of the visit, but talk to students on campus. Like they'll give it to you straight. Like they will tell you why they chose the place, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. And a lot of times that helps to develop that kind of gut check of like, what does this really feel like a place where the energy of the students kind of matches the energy of what I'm looking for in a college experience.
I have a yes and two on the visit that I'm actually going to point directly at Peter. I get a lot of questions about like summer, because going to say the East Coast or somewhere further away, there's concern that they're not going to get a real sense of the campus. And so more people can answer this than just Peter, but what do you think about summer visits? Because that may be the best time to not miss a lot of school, especially for high achieving students with like a ton of APs or whatnot.
Yeah, I think it's fine. You're never going to get everything all at once on any visit. Summer is when we see probably the most visitors come through. I would say just pay attention to what an institution has to offer. Like for us, for example, in the summer, we have usually like four big, huge, not in terms of volume of visitors, but days that we have just broader representation from faculty and staff, and it coincides with other things happening on campus. And like I always tell people, if you're going to come in the summer, don't come the day before the 4th of July because nobody's here, right? Like it's dead. But on any other day in the summer, there'll be a disproportionate number of researchers and athletes on campus than kind of folks who hang out here in the summertime. But it's fine to come whenever you come. I do think, and I'm breaking all the panel rules that I think I suggested before we started, which is not everybody answers every question, but that's why we have rules. Is I think in particular, and I know we have like a no senior parent sort of griping rule for this, but I'm going to gripe about senior parents for a second. Which like I think what we see at this time of year when most of us are on the cusp of or have recently released admission decisions and are now sort of getting to the finish line with our classes is the people that are often sort of successful in not just in gaining admission. I know I'm not meaning about getting in. I'm talking about just sort of at managing the process and sort of getting through this intact are the people who are like organized and pay attention to deadlines and things like that for the next, like for a year ahead of this. And so, like Laura said, I'm the same way. Like I feel like with my own kids, I just want to get through everything. Like I just want to get it done. But in reality, like your role as a parent or a caregiver for someone who's applying to college might be akin to being like a great travel agent. If you've ever had one, like that can get everything, and not just for the visits, but just to sort of on the back end, see that things are aligned as such that your client, the student, is going to have a great experience, knowing that eventually you are not getting on the actual plane. But like the hard things that I feel like we see now are from people who missed this or missed that, or just, like you don't have to be on top of every single detail all the time. And I think students need to own a lot of it, but managing dates and deadlines and visits and whatever can really help to sort of limit some of the other noise in the system, I think. And now I will stop my rant.
All right, so moving on to the next question, because of course, families are starting to think about what their application is going to look like and concern over what matters most. And so what do you consider, and this is really broad, so answer it in whatever sort of narrow way you want, but is there a most important part of the application? So I'll just throw that out there. And it may be different based on your schools, obviously.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. I mean, the UC application process is similar in many ways to what Peter or Laura might describe, but different in a couple of others. Different in that we do not consider letters of recommendation, collect or consider letters of recommendation. We do not interview students. So our application process is still very holistic, but it considers a more narrow set of kind of criteria than what you might see at some other colleges and universities. In my opinion, the backbone of any compelling application is the academic record. Certainly the work that the student is doing in the classroom, the rigor of the high school program, that is something that is going to carry more weight than probably just about anything else in our review process. But the word that you will hear often in describing college admission is context. And what I mean by that is that we're not looking at academic performance as distilled down to one number, either a weighted GPA or an unweighted GPA. What we are trying to understand is what does that mean in the context of that school environment? What kind of courses are available to the student? To what degree are they taking advantage of some of those rigorous courses in their curriculum? And I get this question a lot at UC often that, the perception is, well, students who are going to maybe these large public high schools that have 25, 30 plus APs, like they're going to be at an advantage because they have access to a higher weighted GPA than we might in a school environment that either doesn't offer APs or limits the number of students can take in a given year. That all corrects for itself because we're looking at students in the context of their academic environment. So we're not comparing that 4.4 to that 4.0 from a different school. We're saying in the context of that school, that 4.4 might put the student in the third or fourth decile of their class, whereas that 4.0 is the absolute highest GPA a student could get from that school. So we're contextualizing our understanding of the academic performance, and we're looking for patterns and areas of strength and that kind of thing. So I think sometimes people try to simplify college admission to just a couple of numbers that they think really impacts the decisions, and just know that we are digging much deeper than that to understand what that represents in the context of the student's school and the curriculum that's available to them there.
So I have a bad habit, which is when I meet people like my own age, and it's less appropriate every year that I do it. When I meet people, so like let's say I'm at the soccer field with my kids, and I ask other parents, where did you go to high school? And they're like, what? Because in my mind, I have this Rolodex of high schools, right? And I can be like, oh, that's an IB high school. Oh, that's an independent high school. Oh, that's a religiously affiliated high school. And I know this about the curriculum, where I've been to this school visit. I know where the college counseling office is. So it's one of the best parts about this work to me is that we get to crawl into your students' experience in their life. And it's such a privilege, to be honest. And in doing that, it is the academics, and I agree with Gary, the most important thing is making sure the charge that we have first and foremost as admission people is to ensure that the students who we admit and enroll to our colleges and universities are going to not only academically survive that environment, but are going to be contributing members of it and graduate, right? And so the best indicator that we have of that is how they've done in high school. That doesn't mean it has to be perfect. And I think that can be sometimes the rub is like, oh, well, if academics is what matters, and if my student doesn't have all A's, they're never going to go to college, right? So there's a level of nuance there. I do think from the small college perspective and the liberal arts college perspective, we do think quite a bit about match and really thinking about match with our particular institutions through writing samples, letters of recommendation, extracurricular engagement that aligns with our mission. And so it's not about if I like a student. There are many students who I like very much who are not aligned with what Scripps offers, or students who would be particularly happy at Scripps. And so rather than it being a popularity contest with a particular reader, it really is about this idea of how does the student's experiences and aspirations align with our mission? And we actually talk about that in our comments when we review applications, is mission alignment. And so if you want to be super nerdy like me and dig in and start looking at college missions, I think it can be a great way for your student to have a gut check on, this resonates with me, or I don't care about any of this, right? And so that's one part of what we look at in terms of match, or this concept of fit, which I think colleges talk a lot about, but we don't always do a very good job of explaining.
All right. And I will say, looking at those mission statements can also be really helpful as students try and answer a few months from now, the why do you want to go to Scripps? Why do you want to go to NYU? You know, their immediate thought is like, well, I really like where it's located. I'm like, we're not talking about New York City. Let's dig into what, you know, this school is offering and has to say and is, you know, aiming for, and comment on that. So I think mission statements are a great place to really try and understand culture and mission. Okay, so academic stuff is the backbone of the application. I get a lot of questions about extracurriculars then and the role of them. And it's often framed as, well, you know, my child has all of these things. Where do you see a hole that they could fill this summer? You know, as if you need to check off a certain list of things, or do they have enough community service, or all they do is this. And I worry that they need this other thing. So how are you, if you're again looking at context and all that, what's the role of the activities that are in the application?
Well, we don't want any boring students. So we're always hopeful that the students who are attracted to come here, and I would imagine on many other campuses, have been involved in something that has given them a little bit of spark, that has helped them find and identify interests and build friendships and solve problems and created communities for them. Like, I feel like we get asked all the time, like, what are you looking for? And we're looking for, most of the time, 17 and 18-year-old students who want to come and live and work and play on a residential campus. Now, of course, that's not all of our students, but for the sort of traditional age, sort of high school to college transition, extracurricular activities and other contributions to school and communities can be a window into someone's life that we can evaluate in our very imperfect way of evaluating candidates for admission. But there's no silver bullet. Like, our great hope is that that high school students spend time doing the things that they enjoy and that make them happy. And that includes the summer. And sort of if somebody is really into strategies for getting into selective colleges as a hobby, God bless them. This is a great career, and they, you know, that could be where they end up. Is doing what we do and asking people at dinner parties where they went to high school. I thought I was the only one. But I think it's, people say, well, is it important to do this or that? And I'm like, it's important to do whichever one you want to do. Like, we think as we build the class, like, we find that there's not a certain type of person that we need to find in the pool based on their extracurricular activities to admit them. In fact, we hope that we have students who are both in the class who are very angular, who are very focused on particular things, whether that's academically or otherwise, and then students who have done a bunch of different kinds of stuff and are oftentimes sort of the ligaments of the class that tie together a residence hall room floor or a lab section or a team. So I think it's not the what, it's the why.
Yeah, I agree. The one quick thing I'll add, I think the do what you love because you love to do it is definitely the theme of what you're going to hear from a lot of us around this. And I think it leads to a point that families are often tempted to do, and that is to kind of reverse engineer previous admission outcomes. Well, I know this student was involved in these things and they got admitted. Therefore, I need to copy and paste and do those things. Or this student, you know, only did this one or two things in high school and they didn't get in. Therefore, that's not the way to go, because then you're not going to get admitted to that university. So I think it's really just being guided by, you know, what the student loves to do. I think that energy comes through in the application when students are doing things that, you know, that they really care about. And, you know, it's kind of like Peter said, we often kind of express it as we're not looking for a class of well-rounded individuals. We're looking for a well-rounded class of individuals. Just kind of a play on words, but it kind of expresses that not every student is going to be the same. You know, some students have different interests and engagement, and you know, in any of our classes, there's usually a place for many of those types of students in our class.
Okay. Go ahead, Laura.
Sorry. I think too a lot about like what is the end goal, right, of this for you as a family and as parents, and seeing in the last 5 years what our students have endured, particularly in California with COVID, and then just the myriad of other things that are going on in the world. I have come to a place where I think my only goal for high school students transitioning to college is to enter that space as an emotionally intact human. And if that's the goal, right, and we are who we are, and your kids are who they are, like, do I love to see a girl who's, done service at Planned Parenthood and is a Girl Scout and right, like, of course. But if those are the things that she did to spend her time to be a compelling women's college applicant, but those aren't really the things that excite her, and then she chooses to come to a place that's about those things, I don't think that the end goal is a sense of fulfillment and happiness. And so this idea of spending time doing things, and I think too, one of the things we saw this year especially is that students were slower out of the gate because many of them in their early high school years were incredibly restricted, either because of COVID restrictions or because of their community restrictions. And I would hope, and I know the conversations we had was a level of grace around that, that like you weren't going to be captain of something if you were in your living room doing, high school in ninth grade. So I think some of it is just knowing like we also are experiencing the challenges of our time, and for you as parents to know that we're thinking about that and really do care about these students arriving to us, feeling prepared for the challenges that lie ahead.
That's so helpful. Now I'm going to go to everyone's favorite topic of testing, hard pivot. So, regular conversations around, does it look bad if I don't submit my test scores? Should I submit my test scores for places that are test optional? I know we've got at least the UCs here that are not even looking at testing, but I would love for Gary to say more about that if he's got things to say. Are you considering making testing required again? What's the vibe on testing, advice on testing?
Well, I can start as a test optional place, and then I will obviously hand it over to my colleagues. So I'm very, I don't know if interested is the right word, but it's very interesting to me to see what's happening with testing, particularly in the conversation for our junior families and junior students. Scripps made the decision to go test optional in January of 2020, after 2 years of study with our board of trustees. And so for us, and I think for many places that were already test optional or have done research during this time, who've decided to be permanently test optional, that's something that we pride ourselves on and take very seriously. So when we say we're permanently test optional, that is what we mean. And for what that actually means, I think it is that we want to give students the opportunity to submit testing if they want to, but I think it's an opportunity to be very strategic, right? And you can have conversations with Ms. Cook about it if you should submit your testing. I think a great sort of gut check is if your student is not in the sort of top half of our testing for admitted students or enrolling students, don't submit it. And what happens then if you're at a test optional place is if you don't choose to submit it, it's kind of like an amoeba, right? Like something else just will come in and take up that space, whether it's academic record or letters of recommendation or extracurriculars. But when we say test optional, this is the question I feel like I'm getting a lot is, do you say you're test optional? Are you really test optional? Please know the answer is yes. I was very nervous to read without testing the first year. I do not miss it at all.
I think we are in a weird place with testing. And if we like, if last fall, I would have told anybody that any school that says they're test optional really does mean that. And I think if a place is permanently test optional, like Scripps, then they do mean that. And at Syracuse, we still we went test optional in April of 2020 as a result of the pandemic. Now, Syracuse was never a place that lived and died by the SAT or the ACT, but we have found that in some programs it could help us in a variety of ways to understand context. It's not the be all and end all of contextual selective college admission. Let me be very clear. But I think that there are places that are moving sort of back, like it's murky, and I don't know that I have great advice or counsel other than to have a sort of a testing plan and an application list that is reflective of that testing plan, which could include never taking a test or being thoughtful about schools and how those schools might feel towards testing. We're a place where 40% of the class who is here now has submitted scores, and the admit rate, the percentage of students who applied are not statistically really very different between submitters and non-submitters. But I think as you look across the landscape of sort of temporary test optional places, we have begun to see a trend, as trends often begin in our world, at highly selective universities. And then, of course, in this case, oftentimes also sort of red state flagships sort of moving back towards testing. And I think it's not as clear as it was in the last couple of years when optional, I think, always meant optional.
Yeah, the only thing I would add from UC, so UC is test free. We don't consider SAT or ACT for any applicant, full stop. We have no plans to return to requiring testing or becoming optional. But the point I'll make here is that oftentimes I think people assume that it's people like the three of us on this screen that are making the decision about whether we're going to be test free or test optional or not. And it's not. Like in the case of University of California, it would likely be the faculty that might push this, and then ultimately the Board of Regents would have to decide on behalf of the entire UC system as to whether we would make any change to our testing policy. The one point I will offer now, having been test-free for several years now, is that our first to second year persistence rate is actually a little higher than it was when we required testing, and our average first-year GPA is exactly the same. So from our perspective, we haven't seen any drop off in the quality of students that we're bringing in, their ability to be successful, their persistence in staying enrolled at our campus. So to me, those are good signs that the policy is not doing any harm. And I think the benefit, and this often as you read all these articles, because every time an IB or somebody changes, like you'll see several articles written about this. What often is left out of those is the impact that these policies have on who decides to apply to begin with. That sometimes requiring testing or making it optional, they focus on the impact on the admitted students and enrolling, but they don't focus on the students who just choose to opt out of the process because they think that testing is going to play a bigger role in the decision that it does, and they're scared that their scores might not stack up. So, I like test free. It's been very effective for us, and I certainly hope UC continues with that policy.
Awesome. Thank you all for that. Are there any common mistakes that folks make on their applications / advice you would have about avoiding, those particular mistakes?
One thing I'll share just in terms of like what we call the personal insight question responses, kind of our UC's version of the college essay, is I think there seems to be this idea that we're really looking for perfection, or that style is more important than content, and it's really the opposite. Like what we care about is really knowing the student better after reading these responses than we did before. We're not going through and circling misplaced commas. We're not correcting grammar or syntax. I mean, we want it to be well written. We want to understand what the student is saying. But I think, whether it's AI or trying to get more than help on your essays. I think there's this idea that we want this super polished response, and that's the thing that's going to carry the most weight in terms of how we evaluate written work in the application. And that's not the case for us. I think for us, it's really about content. It's about knowing the student. And I think oftentimes people write very compelling narratives about, a family member and the sacrifices they made for the family. And at the end of it, we're like, well, grandma sounds amazing. I wish she had applied. It's not, I didn't learn much about the student, but I certainly learned a lot about the landscape or the individual or that kind of thing. So I would say just have students keep centered, what is it that I want the college to know about me, and make sure that that's really shining through in those responses.
I'll come back to something that Peter talked about earlier, which is just this idea of organization and deadlines, which seems so stupid and boring, but I do think it's important because one of the things that we will sometimes see in an application and is that there's a disconnect between different parts of the writing. Right. And so like the personal essay is beautiful, very well done. That's what's going to every college. And then when they get to the script specific questions, it's like a different person wrote them. And what I always think is more than anything, that's just a student who felt rushed at the end. And so one of the opportunities I think for a student is, right, to have the conversation with them at some point of is more applications, right? If we have the end goal in mind that you're only going to go to one college, how many applications is reasonable to manage? It's not just how many, application fees you want to pay or how many transcripts you want to send off, but how many application processes can a student and a family actually manage? And I don't think there's a set number. I think that there can be a lot of factors that will affect the number of colleges to which a student applies. But your student, right? And it's this opportunity for them to know themselves of what is reasonable and what is going to lead to the fewest errors. Sometimes we'll get to the part of, why are you interested in scripts? And they'll be like, I'm so interested in Wellesley because, right, it's this thing, and you're like, oh, and that's not like a ding automatically. You're not like, oh, the student is denied. Like, we understand that students are human and they make mistakes, but if we see consistent mistakes or consistent, not showing up for an interview and not, doing these things, what I think is that's a student who's stretched too far. And I don't think that plays well in processes that do want a sense of like knowing and match, where that's something that's important, I think, for liberal arts colleges and for highly selective liberal arts colleges.
Thank you, Laura. I can't underscore that enough, that there is, I think I see a law of diminishing returns. The larger the applicant list is. And I do think some students have an idea that it's like a lottery, and the more scratchers, you buy, the better your chances are. But it doesn't work like that, obviously. And you get stretched thinner and thinner and thinner. But every year I have someone that wants to do 20, 22, 23. And, I don't want to still be reading things on New Year's Eve as they're continuing, and they don't want to be writing them at that point. But there's this feeling that the more, lines I put in the water, the more fish I'm going to catch. So great. Are there any myths about the process any of you would like to dispel? I think for me, one of the biggest ones is that, everybody thinks y'all are like robots sort of making a lottery-based decision. And in fact, you are humans. But yeah,
we're nice. I don't know that it's a myth, but I think getting back to the sort of noise in the system, the extra writing, that I think sometimes it is sort of customary that that families looking to sort of find a strategy, right, or sort of make this process work well might look to sort of add extra voices to the process. And I think that there are, and so there's a whole industry that has sort of would like to sort of monetize anxiety around college admission, right? Through essay writing and test prep and it goes on and on and on. And I think there are a lot of settings when like there are great people who do some of that work, because most students who at most high schools in this country do not have a college counselor, and so it makes sense that one would look outside. I think when you have sort of chosen to be part of the JCHS community, that includes college advising, and Lauren didn't ask us to give a commercial for JCS college advising, but I think one way to have a smoother process is, again, diminishing returns could happen when you sort of add other layers of college advising onto what you already have access to with your students. And so the myth is more sort of hands in the essay and everything is not better.
I'll dispel a couple kind of distinct ones for UC, and I spoke at a program last night and got this very question. First, we have no preference as to whether a student comes from an independent high school or a public high school. There is a perception that UC favors students coming out of public high schools over independent schools. That is not the case. We have no preference in terms of what high school a student might be attending. We have no knowledge of whether you've applied to another campus or the decision that is happening at that other campus. So I think sometimes people think, well, if I get into one, I'm not going to get into another, or that kind of thing. There's no peeking over the fence. We're not calling each other and saying, well, are you taking this student? Okay, then we're not going to take this student. Like, none of that kind of stuff happens. I think the challenge with UC is just how competitive, things have become. We now have 5 campuses that have over 100,000 applicants each year. And so it has become very competitive. And so sometimes the decisions are not predictable. And sometimes that confusion leads to speculation about the why behind why certain students got in and certain students didn't. But I can assure you that when a student clicks submit, if they choose to apply to 4 campuses, they're getting evaluated in 4 independent processes, completely separate from each other, that have nothing to do with the outcome at any one particular campus.
All right. So my last question is, before we see if we have 10 minutes or so for some questions in the chat, do you have any parting advice you would give to students and families as they're really earnestly embarking on this process?
I do. And I think there's an opportunity, I think, to and through the summertime for you as adults, as trusted adults, for your student to get very clear on what your role is. And one of the things that was clear to me this year in reading applications, and again, I think that the students who are seniors this year were 9th grade and peak COVID time, is that when the adults are okay, the kids are okay. And if you get clear on your role and manage your own anxieties about this, which are so real, right? And I sit in panels like this and I do this, and then I just registered my kid for middle school and was a psycho, right? Like, I get that it is hard to allow them developmentally to be 16 and 17 years old in a process that feels like it demands them to be 30. But I do think if you can think of your role as a parent or trusted adult as trying to illuminate the path for them along the way, right? Trying to guide them, trying to mirror back to them the things that they're seeing and saying and conversations they're having with Ms. Cook, they will be better for it. And you will be better for it in that process. And so I think it can look like a lot of different things for families, right? And that families have different setups and different things. But I think for you all as families and as adults in the room with these kids who are still very much kids, right, is to just get clear on what your role is. And if you're not sure, you have a wonderful person in Ms. Cook to also talk to you about that. and to say, is this appropriate or should I be doing this for them, right? And to have those checks along the way, because I do think that it is, it's a big deal and it's an exciting time, but I think anytime it's exciting is also stressful. So I think that's just my advice for you all as the trusted adults in the room. And the kids are going to go through their process with Ms. Cook, and that's all going to come together.
My advice, it's like we planned this, which we didn't, but piggybacks on what Laura said. I think where I have seen landmines in our family and in our town, and I wouldn't see it probably from where I sit at work as much, but certainly in my life at home, I think you have to be really careful with your kids' friends and your friends' kids. Like if you have the kitchen counter or basement sectional or whatever, do people even have basements out there? I don't even know. No, there's no basements. we have sectional couches in our basements, like where our kids watch movies. But if you have the space in your home, in your yard or wherever where your kids want to hang out, like I really hope you don't spend it talking, where your kids' friends want to hang out. I hope you don't spend it talking about college with them. I think that's really dangerous.
My first piece of advice comes from a vanity perspective, and that is if you're doing a Zoom in a hotel room, get better lighting than I did. I swear I do not have like these massive bags under my eyes, but as I'm looking at the screen, it looks that way. But my real advice really comes down to, I think one of the things that really elevates the temperature of this process is this perception that selectivity is a proxy for quality. That the more selective an institution is, the better it is, and more specifically, the better it is for your student. And I think we've got to really break away from that. That there are a number of phenomenal colleges and universities that have admit rates that are, 40, 50+% that offer incredible undergraduate educations for students. And I think we've got to really embrace that, because I think what happens is when you have so many people clamoring for, the quote unquote top, 30 or 40 institutions in the country, it exacerbates this bottleneck and it increases selectivity, and that increases anxiety, and we just get into this endless cycle. So as you're building that list with Ms. Cook, like when she suggests places that might not be on the tip of your tongue, that maybe aren't highly selective, give them a chance, because many of those institutions could be the absolute perfect spot for your student.
And I think, Gary, an interesting piece of that is like, I feel for families and students of like, but how do I know what a good college is, right? If getting all this mail and all these emails and now texting students and on TikTok, right? Like we're trying to be everywhere the students are. And so I do think some of this is the challenge of like, what is a good school? And I do think that but you have a counselor who can guide you through that. And so I think that is the most important thing is not seeing that admit rate as what makes a good school or a good experience. You can have a great school and also not have a great experience. And so that's the other part of this whole thing, but yeah.
All right, I'm going to name that Peter needs to walk to a meeting on another part of campus. So we appreciate your time and thank you so much, and feel free to log off and get moving.
Bye, thanks.
And we've got, 9 minutes left. If anyone has a good general question they want to put in the chat for either Gary or Laura about anything. So appreciate all of these comments. I'm learning some things too. So any questions in the chat? And I so appreciate all of our parents here being attentive and muted and engaged and celebrating comments in the chat. All right, well, maybe we have covered a fair amount of territory, and it has been a good meaty almost hour. So I think with that, we will let everyone get on with their Thursday. But thanks everyone for participating. Thank you so much to Gary and Laura in particular. I know this is such a busy time. I'm sure, Gary, you're out somewhere talking to admitted students and you're trying to close the deal on the end of the class and all the rest. And I will get this up and out to folks if you weren't able to be here for the entire session. And more to come soon after Journeys Week with College Advising. So everyone have a great Thursday.